Anyone who lived through the golden age of arcades knows that few genres managed to capture the energy of group gaming sessions as well as beat-em-ups. They were machines that brought together friends, tokens, and many broken buttons, all in exchange for that addictive feeling of beating up waves of enemies. These games not only marked the childhood of many people, but also shaped the cooperative style that still influences many modern titles today. Today we're going to revisit 10 beat-em-ups that were not just classics, but became eternal icons of the arcades. When we talk about Double Dragon, we're not just discussing a game, we're entering the sacred territory of beat-em-ups. This title from Technos, Japan, literally defined what the genre would be for the next 15 years, introducing revolutionary concepts like two-player cooperative play and the ability to pick up weapons from fallen enemies. It's impossible to underestimate the cultural impact of this game. It took the basic formula established by Renegade and expanded it in a way that would never be the same again. For those who lived through the golden age of arcades, Double Dragon wasn't just entertainment, it was an almost religious experience of gaming brotherhood. The genius of Double Dragon lies in its brutal and effective simplicity. The controls are intuitive enough for anyone to pick up and play, but deep enough to reward dedication and practice. Every punch, every kick, every throw had a weight and a tactile satisfaction that few games have managed to replicate since. Progressing through the levels wasn't just about defeating enemies. It was about mastering a combat system that rewarded timing, positioning, and coordination between players. When you and your partner managed to execute a perfect sequence of coordinated attacks, the feeling was pure arcade magic. Visually, Double Dragon was a technical spectacle for 1987. The large, detailed sprites, fluid animations, and varied environments created a post-apocalyptic atmosphere that was simultaneously dark and exciting. The art direction managed to convey a sense of urgency and real danger. That dystopian New York seemed genuinely dangerous, and every enemy represented a legitimate threat. The game wasn't afraid to be violent and visceral, but it always maintained a tone that was more about heroism than gratuitous brutality. When we look at the history of beat-em-ups, many point to Double Dragon as ground zero. But the truth is that the seed was planted a year earlier by Renegade. This Taito game, originally called Neketsu Kohakunyo-kun in Japan, was the true architect of the genre. It established the fundamental basis: a lone character facing hordes of enemies on a 2.5D plane of movement. The premise was simple and direct, focused on street brawls and rescue, a theme that would become ubiquitous. What made it different from previous fighting games like Karate Champ was the ability to move freely around the screen and the emphasis on combat against multiple opponents rather than one-on-one duels. Renegade's control scheme was, at the same time, its greatest innovation and its biggest barrier. Instead of a jump button, it used a combination of directional inputs to perform jumps, and attacks changed depending on the direction the player was facing in relation to the enemies. It was possible to punch forward, kick backward, and even sit on a downed opponent to deliver more blows. This contextual sensitivity was revolutionary for its time, creating a layer of complexity that later games would simplify. The gameplay was punishing. Enemies were fast, aggressive, and surrounded the player without mercy, requiring precise mastery of this directional system to survive. The legacy of Renegade is that of a technical pioneer, a prototype that proved the concept was viable and, more importantly, fun. Many of the elements that became standard in the genre, multiple enemies on screen, stage progression with a boss at the end, the urban gang theme, were introduced or popularized here. When Capcom stepped into the beat-em-up ring with Final Fight, the impact was seismic. Released in 1989, this game not only refined the Double Dragon formula, it elevated it to a level of audiovisual and gameplay excellence that became the new gold standard. Originally conceived as a sequel to Street Fighter, Final Fight established its own legacy, introducing unforgettable characters and an intensity that few games could match. The story of Mike Haggar, Cody, and Guy fighting to rescue Haggar's daughter Jessica from the Mad Gear Gang in Metro City was the perfect backdrop for a showcase of the power of Capcom's CPS-1 arcade board. What immediately set Final Fight apart was the choice between three playable characters, each with a completely distinct fighting style. Haggar was the power character, slow but devastatingly strong, specializing in grabs. Cody was the balanced character, a versatile street fighter. Guy was the speed character, fast and agile, capable of executing quick combos. This simple addition created immense replay value and allowed for different strategic approaches, especially in cooperative mode. The combat system was simple to learn, with an attack button and a jump button. But the combination of these resulted in combos and special moves that gave an unprecedented sense of fluidity and impact. The impact of Final Fight was so profound that it became the main source of inspiration for most beat-em-ups of the 90s, including Sega's main competitor, Streets of Rage. Many of the enemy archetypes we see to this day, the basic henchman, the charging brute, the fast and annoying knife-wielding enemy, were popularized or perfected here. The game also solidified the structure of themed stages, each culminating in a battle against a charismatic and challenging boss. Captain Commando is definitive proof that Capcom wasn't afraid to be completely insane when it came to beat-em-up design. Set in the futuristic year of 2026, this game introduces us to a world where crime has spread throughout the galaxy, and four unlikely heroes must clean up the mess. What fascinates me most about Captain Commando is how it fully embraces its ridiculous premise. Where else could you play as a baby piloting a mech surfing on a spaceboard? This is the kind of unbridled creativity that only existed in 90s arcades, when developers could let their imaginations run wild without worrying about realism or logical constraints. Captain Commando's mechanics followed the tried-and-true Capcom formula, but with unique touches that set it apart from the competition. The two-button control system, attack and jump, was familiar, but the implementation of unique special attacks for each character added real strategic depth to the combat. Babyhead, the baby in the mech, wasn't just a visual gimmick. He actually played differently, with superior range and power that compensated for his lower mobility. The pilotable mechs scattered throughout the levels weren't just temporary power-ups, but completely changed the game's dynamics, allowing for devastating attacks and entirely new strategies. The variety of available weapons, from pistols to flamethrowers, kept every confrontation fresh and exciting. Captain Commando featured that refined artistic quality for which Capcom was famous, even if it didn't reach the technical peaks of some of its predecessors. The sprites were clean and well animated, with memorable character designs that managed to balance the ridiculous with the badass. The futuristic settings offered good visual variety, from industrial complexes to space bases, each with its own unique environmental details. In 1993, Capcom was at the peak of its beat-em-up production, and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is perhaps the crown jewel of that period. Based on a relatively obscure comic book called Xenozoic Tales, the game combined the classic action of the genre with an unusual premise: a post-apocalyptic future where humanity coexists with dinosaurs. This fusion of elements, coupled with Capcom's technical mastery on the CPS 1.5 board, resulted in an arcade experience that was both familiar in its gameplay and completely unique in its presentation and atmosphere. The big differentiator of Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, as the name suggests, was the interaction with the dinosaurs. Instead of being mere enemies, the dinosaurs acted as a neutral and chaotic element on the battlefield. They could be peaceful, indicated by the color green, but if attacked by players or enemies, they would become enraged, indicated by the color orange-red, and attack anyone in their path. This created dynamic and unpredictable situations, forcing players not only to deal with the henchmen, but also to manage the presence of these powerful creatures. Additionally, the game featured an iconic driving stage, where players controlled the titular Cadillac, running over enemies in a frenetic action sequence that broke the rhythm of the standard gameplay. Visually, the game was one of the most beautiful beat-em-ups ever made. The sprite art was fantastic, with characters and enemies full of personality and extremely fluid animations. The backgrounds were detailed and told a visual story about that post-apocalyptic world. The soundtrack was memorable, with themes that mixed rock and an adventurous tone that perfectly matched the action. The sound design was robust, with the noise of firearms and the roars of dinosaurs creating an immersive and impactful soundscape. Knights of the Round is proof that the medieval beat-em-up is a genre within a genre, and here Capcom embraces the Arthurian legend with a layer of parry and sword that changes the game from crowd-pushing to a more technical ballet. Reading range, timing, and charged strikes produces a satisfying learning curve, especially when you master mounted attacks and space control with a longsword. It's brawling with dueling etiquette. Visually, the CPS-1 handles wood, steel, and fire with opulent textures, and the armor and hood sell the medieval fantasy without losing legibility, something difficult in dense sprites. The trio of knights creates complementary profiles that speak to the viewer accustomed to RPG mages and warriors, and this helps in playing co-op with a clear role. In essence, it's Capcom saying, you can make a chivalrous beat-em-up with weight, and they really do. The pace isn't one of an urban rush, it's of advance and retreat, mental parry, and reading the enemy's spear shaft. The grace is in defeating the group with technique, not just with special spam. The horses and mounted sections break the monotony and create a mini-game within the combat, requiring direction and line zoning as if it were a contact-based horizontal shooter. The soundtrack sets the epic tone and elevates the sense of odyssey, helping to cleanse the palate between so many street-level games in the same video session. In co-op, the conversation changes. While one holds the line, the other clears the flank, and this rewards players who talk and call plays, bringing back the spirit of coordinated arcade gaming. It's a game that shines in the hands of those who enjoy taming a system and that shows up beautifully on camera. The RPG-light progression system of Knights of the Round was revolutionary for the genre at the time. Streets of Rage 2 is widely considered not only the best game in the Streets of Rage series, but one of the best beat-em-ups ever created for any platform. Released by Sega in 1992, this title achieved something extraordinary. It surpassed its predecessor in practically every imaginable aspect. What is most impressive about Streets of Rage 2 is how it took the already solid formula of the original and refined it to perfection. Every element, from the responsive controls to the unforgettable soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro, worked in perfect harmony to create an experience that still serves as the gold standard for the genre today. For those who lived through the 16-bit era, this was not just a game. It was a statement that Sega could compete with anyone when it came to beat-em-ups. The gameplay of Streets of Rage 2 was a masterclass in refined and accessible design. The 4 characters, Axel, Blaze, Max, and Skate, offered genuinely distinct playstyles that completely changed the experience depending on your choice. Blaze with her perfect balance of speed and power, Max with his devastating brute force, or Skate with his superior agility. Each character rewarded different playstyles. The special attack system, although it removed the iconic police support from the original, introduced unique moves that drained health but offered devastating power. The variety of enemies was impressive. From bikers trying to run over players to ninjas with swords, each requiring specific strategies. Technically, Streets of Rage 2 was a tour de force that demonstrated the full potential of 16-bit hardware. The graphics were detailed and colorful, with fluid animations that made every move feel impactful and satisfying. Bad Dudes vs. DragonNinja is the perfect embodiment of the irreverent and over-the-top spirit of 80s arcades. Developed by Data East in 1988, this game achieved something few titles have, becoming simultaneously a legitimate product of its time and a self-aware parody of 80s American culture. The premise is absolutely ridiculous. Ninjas have kidnapped President Ronnie, an obvious reference to Ronald Reagan, and only 2 guys bad enough can save him. What impresses me most about Bad Dudes is how it completely embraces its own absurdity without ever blinking, delivering an experience that is genuinely fun, precisely because it doesn't take itself seriously. Bad Dudes' combat system was surprisingly deep for a seemingly simple game. Blade and Striker started with only basic punches, kicks, and jumps, but could develop special moves like spinning kicks and charged energy attacks that devastated multiple enemies. The mechanic of charging internal energy by holding the punch button created an interesting dynamic between fast combat and strategic long-range attacks. The variety of power-ups, from knives and nunchucks to healing items and time extensions, kept each screen interesting and unpredictable. What really set the combat apart was how different types of enemies required specific strategies. Basic ninjas could be defeated easily, but acrobatic kunoichi and attack dogs forced players to constantly adapt their tactics. Bad Dude's combat system was surprisingly deep for a seemingly simple game. Blade and Striker started with only basic punches, kicks, and jumps, but could develop special moves like spinning kicks and charged energy attacks that devastated multiple enemies. Konami's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is much more than just a successful licensed game. It's definitive proof that property adaptations can be masterpieces when treated with respect and genuine creativity. Released in 1989 at the height of the Turtles' popularity, this beat-em-up managed to perfectly capture the essence of the animated series while creating an arcade experience that worked magnificently on its own. What impresses me most about this title is how it managed to perfectly balance fidelity to the source material with the demands of a competitive arcade beat-em-up. For 4 players to gather around an arcade cabinet and choose between Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo was an almost sacred ritual of 90s arcade culture. The simultaneous 4-player system was revolutionary for its time and created a cooperative experience that has never been truly replicated. Each turtle had unique moves and weapons that reflected their personalities from the series. Leonardo with his precise katanas, Donatello with his superior reach, Raphael with his speed and aggressiveness, and Michelangelo with his laid-back style. The gameplay managed to be both accessible for kids and deep enough for hardcore players, with advanced combos and strategies that rewarded dedication. Special mechanics, like throwing enemies at other enemies or using the environment as a weapon, added layers of depth that kept the combat interesting even after multiple sessions. The cultural impact of the Mutant arcade goes far beyond its merits as a video game. It became the highest-grossing arcade game of 1990 in the United States and Konami's biggest arcade hit, proving that licenses could be gold mines when executed correctly.
The turtle. The turtle.
Vendetta is the beat-em-up that Konami created when it decided to show it could compete directly with masters of the genre like Capcom and Technos Japan. Known in Japan as Crime Fighters 2, this title represented a significant evolution from the original Crime Fighters of 1989, offering 4-player cooperative action in a city dominated by crime. What fascinates me most about Vendetta is how it managed to create a unique visual and tonal identity that stood out in a market saturated with beat-em-ups. While other games in the genre opted for cartoonish or science fiction tones, Vendetta embraced a noir comic book aesthetic that was both serious and stylized. Vendetta's 4-character system was carefully balanced, with each vigilante offering a genuinely distinct combat style. Blood, the ex-boxer, prioritized powerful and direct strikes that reflected his experience in the ring. Hawk, the ex-professional wrestler, dominated with devastating grappling and throws. Boomer, a martial arts expert, offered superior speed and technique. Sledge, the ex-military convict, combined brute force with combat tactics learned in the army. This diversity was not just cosmetic. Each character truly changed how the game was played, forcing players to adapt their strategies depending on their choice. The legacy of Vendetta in the history of beat-em-ups is interesting, because it represents both a technical peak and a moment of transition for the genre. Although it never achieved the worldwide fame of titles like Final Fight or Streets of Rage, it influenced many developers with its refined cooperative mechanics and more mature approach to the urban theme. For dedicated fans of the genre, Vendetta is often cited as one of the most underrated beat-em-ups of the arcade era, offering depth and variety that rivaled the most famous ones. Well, that was my list. Now I want to know yours. Leave it in the comments. I'll be signing off here until next time.